There's no shortage of animal heroes today, from service dogs caring for their owners to those serving with the police, fire departments, and militaries across the world. Many animals of the past were heroes, to the point they were celebrities in their day. In some cases, they became celebrities due to the celebrity of their master. In others, their own exploits garnered them fame. A Latin phrase, sic transit gloria mundi, thus passes the world's glory, is sometimes paraphrased, all glory is fleeting. Certainly, the phrase applies to the animals in today's video, all of which were honoured in life, though their stories are known to relatively few today. Here are 10 memorable animals celebrated as heroes during their lifetimes, and why. Number 10. Copenhagen, the racehorse who became a war hero. Copenhagen was a part thoroughbred and part Arabian racehorse, with his maternal grandsire the winner of the 1793 Epsom Derby. In 1811, Copenhagen began a racing career in which he gained marginal success and lasted just 2 seasons. In 1813, the 5-year-old stallion was sent to Lisbon, part of a consignment of several horses for the use of British officers, and later that year was purchased by Colonel Sir Alexander Gordon. Gordon acquired the horse for the commander of British forces during the Peninsular War with Napoleon in Spain, Sir Arthur Wellesley. Wellesley then held the title of Marquess of Wellington, since his brother Richard, also a Marquess, had retained the family name in his title. Wellington found Copenhagen to be an exceptional horse in battle and in travel. It was said that Copenhagen would allow no other to ride him, and he even took a kick Wellington from time to time. As Wellington's fame grew, so did that of his horse, and his mane and tail were snipped to allow jewellery to be made of his hair. At the Battle of Waterloo, Wellington remained on Copenhagen for 17 hours, and his praise of the horse added to its fame. Wellington continued to ride Copenhagen in victory parades and other events until the horse was retired at the Duke's estate at Stratfield Stay, where he enjoyed sugar cakes and other delectables until his death at the age of 28. The Duke had him buried at Stratfield, though he later claimed to have no knowledge of where the horse was interred. Years later, a headstone was placed at the site where he was believed to have been buried. He's memorialized in equestrian statues of the Duke of Wellington and in many paintings of the mounted Duke in battle. Number 9. Montauciel, the sheep who flew in a hot air balloon. The Montgolfier brothers, Joseph Michel and Jacques Etienne, were early air experimenters with hot air balloons, though they believed it was smoke, which in their minds contained a gas they called Montgolfier gas, which caused their balloons to rise. In 1782, they proposed the use of their balloons as a means of assaulting the British fortress of Gibraltar to King Louis XVI. The king agreed to allow a demonstration, but at the time, no living thing other than birds had ascended to what they called the upper atmosphere, about 1,600 feet up. The brothers proposed launching a rooster, a duck, and a sheep. The latter was chosen because it was believed its internal anatomy was similar to that of a human. The birds, which were expected to be unharmed, served as controls for the experiment. So, on September the 19th, 1783, with King Louis and Queen Marie Antoinette in attendance, as well as Benjamin Franklin, a sheep became the first mammal to ascend into the sky in a man-made vehicle. The brothers named the sheep Montauciel, French for ascend the sky. It flew a distance of about 2 miles at an altitude of about 1,500 feet and landed safely. Montauciel exhibited no harm from its experience, and the king agreed to further demonstrations of flight, with the brothers taking turns as the balloon's pilots. Jacques Etienne went first, making him the first man to fly in a balloon. Marie Antoinette was smitten by Montauciel, and to further ingratiate themselves with His Majesty, they needed money. The brothers made her a gift of the sheep. She kept it in the gardens of Versailles and allegedly fed it candy and other sweets. Sheep were then common on palace grounds, as they kept the lawns clipped with their grazing, so Montauciel likely had plenty of ovine company. Number 8. Simon, ship's cat on HMS Amethyst. Ships carried cats as mascots for centuries, both to entertain the crew and, more importantly, to help control rodents. Several became famous, including Unsinkable Sam, who allegedly survived the sinkings of 3 ships. Simon, ship's cat in HMS Amethyst in the late 1940s, earned the Dickin Medal for his heroics aboard the ship during its deployment to China during the Chinese Civil War. Ordered in Nanking to protect the British Embassy from the Communists, Amethyst came under fire on April 20th, 1949, while still travelling up the Yangtze River. Some 22 men of its crew were killed and several more were wounded, including Simon, severely enough that he wasn't expected to survive. Simon suffered lacerations and several burns, but after the crew was attended to, he was cared for by the ship's medical staff. Eventually, he returned to duty, helping to control the ship's worsening rodent problem. From April the 30th into July, Amethyst was unable to depart for Hong Kong without being shelled by communist guns. For months, negotiations for the ship's release proved fruitless. The long stay in the river caused the rodent infestation to worsen, which threatened the dwindling food stores. As he regained his health, Simon stayed busy. Finally, on 30th of July, Amethyst slipped away under cover of darkness, eluded the communist battery, and returned to Hong Kong. There, Simon's story would become known to the world. The ship's captain, Lieutenant Commander Bernard Skinner, was killed during the attack. On April the 21st, Lieutenant Commander John Kierans arrived from the British Embassy and took command of the vessel through its ordeal and escape. Kierans was not a fan of the cat when he came aboard. Simon caused him to change his mind. He recommended Simon for the Dickon Medal, and when the award was confirmed in August, the crew fashioned a collar for Simon in the colours of the award's ribbon. He was scheduled to receive the award formally on December the 11th, after Simon completed quarantine upon arrival in Britain in November. Sadly, Simon died of enteritis in late November. He was given a naval funeral with full honours and buried in the PDSA, People's Dispensary for Sick Animals Cemetery at Ilford. To date, Simon is the only cat to be awarded the Dickon Medal, often referred to as the Victoria Cross for service animals. Number 7. Comanche, survivor of Custer's last stand. Comanche was a 15-hand mixed-breed gelding purchased by the U.S. Army in 1868 for use as a cavalry mount. At Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, Captain Miles Keogh encountered the horse and purchased it from the Army to serve as his personal mount. Keogh served in the 7th Cavalry, a newly formed unit commanded by Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer. Keogh was mounted on Comanche when he rode with Custer at the Battle of Little Bighorn in June 1876. When the bodies of Custer's men were discovered by troops under General Alfred Terry, they found the badly wounded horse on the battlefield 2 days after the battle. Comanche was taken to Fort Lincoln, nursed back to health, and retired. In the order establishing his retirement, it was mandated that Comanche will not be ridden by any person whatsoever under any circumstances, nor will he be put to any kind of work. Comanche was used in regimental formal mounted formations, saddled, bridled, and draped in mourning garb for the remainder of his life. He lived to 29 years of age, according to estimates of his age at the time he was purchased by the Army in 1868. After he died, he was given a funeral with full military honours, though the horse was not interred. Instead, he was sent to the University of Kansas, and taxidermists preserved his body for display. He is still there in a temperature and humidity-controlled glass case display at the University of Kansas Natural History Museum. Comanche is often referred to as the only U.S. Army member with Custer's command to have survived Little Bighorn, and as the only cavalry horse to have survived the battle. Neither is true, though it is true he is the only veteran of the battle around today, in a manner of speaking. Number 6. Antis, the German shepherd that helped bomb Germany. Czechoslovakian Air Force Airman Václav Bozdek fled his home country to Poland when Hitler annexed the Sudetenland in 1938. From Poland, he made his way to France, where he served with the French Air Force until it was apparent France was about to fall to the Germans in 1940. While there, he either found or purchased a German Shepherd puppy. His later stories varied. He smuggled the pup into Britain when he escaped that country, evading the British quarantine laws. He joined the Royal Air Force, and the dog joined him, living on base. Assigned to a Wellington bomber, Bozdek was on a flight when he discovered the dog had stowed away on the airplane. The crew decided, following the mission, that the dog, which its owner named Antis, had brought them luck. And so, despite it being against regulations, Antis became part of the crew, normally 6 men. In the case of Bozdek's Wellington, it became 6 men and a dog. Antis flew 30 missions during the war before the illicit practice was discovered. After the war, he was returned to Czechoslovakia with his master. When the Soviet Union made it plain that Czechoslovakia was to be a communist puppet state, Bozdek again fled, leaving behind his wife and child, but taking his dog, which helped him evade Soviet and Czech secret police and border guards to cross the border into West Germany. From there, he again went to England with Antis. He never returned to Czechoslovakia. Following the war, the story of the German Shepherd flying on bombing missions over Germany became well known, including the fact Antis had been wounded by flak fragments on 2 occasions. Antis was recommended for the Dickon Medal, which was pinned to his collar by Field Marshal Archibald Wavell in 1949. Number 5. Enos, the only chimpanzee so far to orbit Earth. Enos is not as well known as Ham, the first chimpanzee to fly to space and return to Earth. Ham's flight was suborbital, lasting only 15 minutes. Because his flight was longer, Enos required more extensive training than Ham and was subjected to zero-gravity conditions for a longer period of time. Enos's flight was far from problem-free, and after just 2 of the planned 3 orbits, NASA aborted the mission, though the chimp returned to Earth safely and was recovered. Enos, like Ham, was trained to press levers in response to light patterns and received a small electric shock on the soles of his feet if he didn't respond correctly, or at all. During the flight, Enos sometimes responded correctly, only to receive a shock due to a failure in the system. At times, the frustrated chimp pushed different combinations of levers, only to receive further shocks. In all, Enos received 78 shocks during his flight, nearly all of them because of the failure of the system. His capsule also overheated, adding to the animal's discomfort. Finally, NASA decided to bring him down early. Enos' problems were not over though. His capsule splashed down far away from where his earthbound controllers anticipated, and Enos had to ride out his weight on the tossing ocean while the Navy steamed to recover him. While he waited over 3 hours, Enos ripped open his spacesuit and tore up his biosensors, as well as his urinary catheter, in a perfectly understandable expression of disgust. Enos died of dysentery less than a year after his spaceflight. NASA officially chronicled it as a success to the newspapers and other media. Number 4. Sergeant Reckless, USMC. Sergeant Reckless was a Korean mare of Mongolian breeding purchased from a South Korean stable boy at the Seoul racetrack by US Marines in 1952. The Marines intended her to be a pack horse for a recall-less rifle platoon, 5th Marine Regiment. The mare was allowed to roam freely through their encampment and became known for a willingness to eat virtually anything put before her. She also learned to drink both Coca-Cola and GI-issued beer with her Marines, and she exhibited exceptional intelligence. Sergeant Reckless learned the route from the combat fronts to the supply depots after just 1 or 2 trips by her handler. She would then make the trip on her own, freeing her handler to perform other duties. On one day of heavy fighting, Sergeant Reckless made 51 trips on her own, resupplying the Marines on the front lines. She often transported wounded on her return trips as well. She received 2 Purple Hearts after being twice wounded during the war, and afterwards was awarded the Good Conduct Medal. She also received the Dickin Medal, a Navy Unit Commendation, and numerous other awards. After the war, she stayed in the Marines, spending most of her time at Camp Pendleton, where she often snacked on her own blankets, a proclivity she had also demonstrated in Korea. Reckless retired from the Marine Corps in 1960, and instead of taking retirement pay, she accepted free room and board. During her career, few Marines were allowed to ride her, though legendary Marine Chesty Puller did, and later a foal she produced was named Chesty in his honor. Sergeant Reckless died in 1968. She is honored through several monuments in the United States and South Korea, as well as in Marine Corps lore. Number 3. Kaiser, the longest-held prisoner of war in American history. Kaiser was a German carrier pigeon captured by the Americans near the end of the First World War. After the war's end, the bird, who was given the name Kaiser by his American captors, was brought to the United States. After a stint at being used for publicity purposes, Kaiser was assigned a job likely never before or since offered to a prisoner of war. He was sent to the Signal Corps Pigeon Center at Fort Monmouth in New Jersey. Kaiser was assigned to serve as a breeding pigeon. Despite the onerous nature of his duties, Kaiser evidently tackled them enthusiastically. After the United States entered the Second World War, Kaiser performed his duties at Camp Crowder, Missouri. By then, he had sired scores of offspring, which served on all fronts where American troops fought during the war. During the war years, Kaiser, who lived with his mate, Lady Bell, enjoyed a private loft, which the Army thoughtfully provided with a heater during the cold Missouri nights. Over 75 pigeons sired by Kaiser entered the Signal Corps during World War II, an indication that he took his duties very seriously. Kaiser died on October 31st, 1949. There's practically no way to establish the number of pigeons his progeny produced for the US Army. The latter dissolved the pigeon service in the late 1950s, but his heroic performance of his duties during the Second World War led him to being preserved at the Smithsonian Institution, along with other heroic pigeons of his era. He must have loved his work because he is the longest-lived carrier pigeon on record, living over 33 years. He was also the longest American-held prisoner of war in the nation's history. Number 2. Judy, the only dog to be held as a POW during World War II. Judy was the ship's mascot aboard the HMS Grasshopper when that vessel attempted to flee Singapore early in the Pacific War in 1942. The ship was sunk en route to the Dutch East Indies, and the survivors, which included Judy, attempted to reach safety over land but were captured by the Japanese and imprisoned at Medan. There, a British prisoner, Frank Williams, convinced the Japanese commandant to treat Judy, a pedigreed pointer, as a prisoner of war. Miraculously, the commandant agreed, and Judy became the only canine registered prisoner of war of World War II. Like other British prisoners, Judy endured the kicks and beatings administered by the Japanese guards, but she stayed alive. Judy evidently got in and out of camp at will because she delivered 2 litters of puppies during her incarceration. In 1944, Williams and 700 other prisoners were transferred to Singapore by ship. Williams smuggled Judy aboard. When the ship was torpedoed by a British submarine, Williams and Judy both survived, but were separated for some time. By 1945, Judy was acting more aggressively toward the Japanese, and they decided to shoot the dog. Judy fled from the camp into the jungle and did not return until after the Japanese guards had abandoned the camp. After the war, Judy was smuggled into a troop ship bound for Liverpool by Frank Williams. After the latter used an advertisement to solicit funds to pay for the quarantine fees, Judy entered quarantine and was finally released to Frank in the UK in April 1946. She became a celebrity, met actor David Niven, and was feted in towns across the UK. She then travelled with Frank to East Africa. There it was learned she had a tumour, which was surgically removed, but an infection proved too much for her to handle. She was euthanized in 1950. Judy was awarded the Dickin Medal for magnificent courage and endurance in Japanese prison camps in May 1946. Number 1. Rin Tin Tin, an early international action hero. The original Rin Tin Tin was a newly born puppy when he was found by an American soldier in France during World War I. The soldier, Corporal Lee Duncan, discovered 5 pups and their mother, the puppies so young their eyes were not yet open. The mother was emaciated. After nursing the mother to health and weaning the puppies, Duncan kept one of each sex for himself. He named the male Rin Tin Tin, though he called the dog Rinty, and his sister he named Nanette. He smuggled both pups onto the ship, taking him back to the United States. Nanette developed pneumonia, and Duncan replaced her with another shepherd pup in New Jersey before traveling across the United States by train to California. Duncan trained both dogs on his own. In 1922, Rin Tin Tin appeared in his first film role, portraying a wolf in the silent film The Man from Hell's River. The following year, he appeared as the star in the film Where the North Begins. Rin Tin Tin became a major big-screen action hero, popularizing the then little-known German Shepherd breed in the United States. Because the films had no dialogue and could be shown overseas by simply changing the intertitle screens to the appropriate dialogue, Rin Tin Tin became a global superstar, popular on the 5 inhabited continents. He had just ventured into sound movies when he died in 1932, aged 13 or 14, depending on the source. Radio networks interrupted programs to announce the news. Obituaries and depreciations appeared in newspapers and national magazines. By the time of his death, his sons and grandsons were playing him on screen. He was buried in Duncan's Los Angeles backyard and later reinterred in the Cimetière de Chillon in Paris, France, the country of his birth. His descendants continue to portray his persona using his name to the present day.